will be quite honest with you. That song, I feel like I've heard that sang in many different places, and there's something about that. Where will on the country or the better? I don't know where it's at. I can hear it in Maple Avenue, and I can hear it here over the years. I don't know. There's something about that bass part there that it gets a little higher, and I don't know. Sounded good from up front just then as well. Tonight is our last night of miracle lessons, although we are going to have a wrap-up lesson next week. I haven't decided yet if I'm going to give you a test. I might give you a written test, and we'll just sit here and work for 45 minutes next Wednesday night. And if you pass, we'll be done. If you fail, we'll just do it all over again. So I haven't decided on that. Y'all got to handle business tonight before we do that. But tonight we'll be in John, the 21st chapter. So recommend, advise, suggest, whatever word you want to use there, that we go to John chapter 21. And I don't know if this is relevant, but I want you tonight, as we discuss this, to think about the situation as it pertains to this miracle, but also think about how that some of the things that we've studied over this last year at this miracle lessons, they sometimes kind of repeat themselves a little bit, and you'll see a little bit of that here this evening as well. Officially, our title, I guess we could say, is the second catch of fish, and we started one of our earliest lessons. I don't remember exactly which one, but it dealt with this pretty early in Jesus's ministry as well, and so we'll see a second round of it. I think it was our fourth lesson, maybe way back when. But John chapter 21, my Bible calls John chapter 1, the heading there, Breakfast by the Sea. And that's what we'll be looking at here this evening. But this is a miracle, as it were, and this will take place post-resurrection. We have talked about there being 34 miracles. Some people say there's 37, 36, 35. Some of them are debated as to whether or not you would call it a miracle or not. That's kind of irrelevant to it. But this is the post-resurrection that we'll see. And so this is the first or the final miracle we see after Jesus's resurrection. You can see there on the screen that we see that Jesus rises from the grave early on the first day and appears to Mary Magdalene as his tomb. And you'll see, and others at the tomb as well. But Mark and John covers that. This last bit, as you can see there, it kind of hits on a few things. Jesus is in a few different places at various times, but he appeared to some women in Matthew chapter 26. He appears to Peter in Luke chapter 24, to two disciples on the road to Emmaus. That's in Luke 24 as well. In the evening to the disciples gathered in the room in Jerusalem, but Thomas was absent from that. That's John chapter 20. And then a week later, also on the first day of the week, he again appears to disciples. This time Thomas would be present. And so Jesus is appearing to quite a few different people, different spots, different places. Before we go any further, and I know this is a class about miracles, not about the resurrection or anything like that, but why might it be relevant that Jesus appeared to numerous people at various times in various places after his resurrection? Okay, that works. Be hard to deny. Uh-huh.
One person tell you something is one thing, two, three. But when 500 people tell
Fulfills prophecy. Go ahead.
if one church said it, that'd be one thing. But if 4 or 5 or 6 or 7 churches or groups of worshipers are telling the same story, then it adds a lot more credence.
Sure. I've told you this story before, I think, but years ago, Mary and I were at the mall in Lexington, and we saw the quarterback for the University of Kentucky at the time, and he was a 6'5" guy. And I told Mary, I said, and Mary didn't even see him. I was like, well, usually you would see, but it almost to the point now when I think about that story, I'm not even totally convinced I saw him, because Mary has said, she just absolutely didn't see this gigantic man walking down the mall. Yes, I'm reluctantly going to call on you. What? I don't know. He was pretty tall, but nonetheless, none of you all were there. And I don't know anybody that was. Mary's the only person I know that was there, and she can't seem to vouch for the fact that I saw him. But what if all of us had went to the mall that day in various different places, and I had seen this guy at the sporting goods store, but you saw him at the hardware store, and you saw him in the food court, and we all just happened to come back together and say, did you see? Well, that Mary would be more inclined to believe me, in that case, if we heard it from different spots. And I think that's kind of what Ben was saying right there as well, is that this opened the door, kind of exposed more people even to Jesus. But the story for us tonight is going to be an appearance at the Sea of Galilee. And so sometimes after this, and you can see this, the disciples returned to Galilee. Most of them were from there, at least most of his apostles were from in and around that area. And it's there where we'll see our miracle take place this evening. And so he's going to reveal himself to a few different people as well. I guess that's our last painting of the I should have saved all of these. That would have been that would have been good. I don't know if the lessons are still saved or not. I know you go through and delete some of them from time to time. I thought I'd save a good old one for us here tonight. This is Jesus, the appearance on Lake Tiberias. And when we use the word Lake Tiberias, that's the title here. It's the same as the Sea of Galilee. It's the same place. This was 710 years ago. Somebody put this painting in there. I don't know. I'm fascinated every week by it. Some of you all it may not be, but John chapter 21 is where we're going to be, and we'll talk a little bit about a few things here as we go. But let's start with the first 6 verses here. This is John. Yes, sir.
It's kind of fitting that Jesus is kind of winding up kind of where he started. I know there's a pain in the first deal, but he found his apostles there. It's just what we read about him.
Yeah. I just want to thank you for taking Ben's job tonight and stealing everything that I had. Ben, you got anything else to add? We can wrap this up in about 5 minutes if you're going to toss something in there. John chapter 21, let's look at verses 1 through 6. Maria, do you care to read this for us, please, dear? All right, so we'll come back into this with a few questions to think about to start with. So, as Dad said there just a minute ago, well said, couldn't have said any better right there. Jesus shows himself at what place? So where are we? Sea of Galilee. So now was when I was going to say the question, doesn't it seem fitting that, that they would be there? But truthfully, it kind of does, right? Why would the disciples maybe be here?
They went back to work, most likely to do the job that they've done their whole life.
Right. Absolutely. And so it would seem fitting, and it won't be until Acts that we see like the people that Jesus, the Holy Spirit descends and they go out into the world. But it's almost like the end of vacation, right? And we get home from vacation, and what do you do then? Back to work, right? And, and truthfully, when you go back to work, sometimes it's a little depressing because, you've enjoyed your trip, but sometimes it's kind of just to get back in the routine, right? This is what we do. I get up in the morning, this is where we go, and I get to see the people. Boo talked way, way, way back when about like people, were the apostles married or not? Well, perhaps they were. And they had families, whether or not they were married or not. And it might have been the first time in a few years that they've been able to spend a little time with them. What were they? Which disciples do we see there in John 1 and 2? They gave us 7 names. James and John, yeah, Peter, Thomas, Nathaniel. Well, they were the sons of Zebedee, yeah, but 2 others we don't get a name for right there. But these are all the people that Ben read a few moments ago that Jesus had called at first. The reason why you might have thought, why are we reading what Ben read there? Because we are sort of coming full circle. And that what Ben read a few moments ago from Matthew chapter 4 was Jesus calling them, right? And they were, and what did they do whenever Jesus called Peter and Andrew and James and John? They dropped their nets and they went to work with them. Well, it's almost like we can read in John 21, verses 1 and 2, they're picking the nets back up almost, right? That they're going back into the work that they had done. But what were they doing? And maybe even more importantly, in question 3, had they been successful in what they were doing? They weren't, right? Hadn't been successful. In verse 3, it said, Peter said to them, I am going fishing, right? And they said to him, well, we're going to go with you also. And they went out and immediately got into the boat. And that night, but they, Lucille, you said they caught what? Caught nothing, right? And we talked about that. You may remember all the way back when they had went fishing and they had caught nothing there. But this would be a disappointing return, perhaps, to what you think about what they have experienced over the course of the last last years, a couple years of their life. And then you go back to work and you had been with Jesus and you had seen all these great things happen. And now what? Probably some. Right. Do you think at any point when they were casting those nets and not catching anything, it might have crossed their mind all the withered arms that had been healed, all the dead people that had been raised, all the food that had been provided? Do you think they ever thought, oh, it'd be nice to have that guy back with us again, right? Be nice if we could pull these fish back in right here. Yep. Right. Sure. Yeah. Sure. Right. So.
Then I wonder too, the comrades, the people around him, say, well, that's
yeah.
Are you finished with your mark?
Yeah. Yeah. Guess who's back, right? Oh, sure. I'm sure. That seems. Oh, of course. So the next morning, then, who do they see standing on this? Well, maybe I should say, well, I'll ask it. Who's standing on the shore in the morning, and did they know that that's who it was? Verse 4, it says, but when the morning now come, Jesus stood on the shore, but the disciples didn't know who he was. But now, is this the first time we've seen something like this in one of these miracle stories? No. Why do you think it might have been difficult for them to recognize Jesus? Okay. Definitely not. Oh, sure. Coming off the water. So we'll see in just a moment that it kind of becomes clear to them, but they don't seem to know who Jesus was, at least at the time. And Jesus asked them a question. And I think this is a simplistic question, but I think it shows the humanity, really, of Jesus right here. In verse 5, what question did he ask him? Have you any food? And they answered what? They answered no. I'm not a fisherman, but several of you are or have been. And I would imagine that everybody that has went out fishing, when you've seen somebody else coming in, you've asked them, did you catch anything, right? And the response is, well, not much, or no, they're jumping in the boat, or somewhere in between. This is fisherman chatter, right? This is just common conversation. He said, do you have any food? And they said, no. And the disciples answered no. Then what Jesus tell them to do? Now, verse 4, they didn't know that it was Jesus. Verse 5, they hear him say this. Verse 6, cast your net out to the right side of the boat and you'll find some. Wonder if it's clicking yet. Wonder if it's starting to click. Wait a minute. Do we know this guy, right? Well, it does. You're a little ahead of the game right there. But he said, and I'm sure there's probably some thought, this sounds familiar, right? Luke chapter 5, this same story, or a story almost the same way, is told, right? And said Jesus was preaching near Galilee, and he saw boats on the water's edge, and one of them belonged to Peter, and he said what to Peter? Do you remember what he said in Luke chapter 5? It's not this story, but when they were having some trouble catching fish. So go out into the deep water, right? So go out into the deep water, let down the nets for a catch, right? And Peter answered what? Do you remember what Peter said to him in Luke chapter 5? Been fishing all night. We've worked hard all night. We haven't caught anything. And he didn't say that, but you can read that. But we're killed. And I'm looking forward to going home and taking it. But he said what to Jesus though? He said, nevertheless, we'll go out and let down the nets one more time. And how did that go for him? Really? The boat nearly sank right there. In John 21 and verse 6, Jesus said, cast the net on the right side of the boat and you will find some. What's the back half of verse 6 say? They were so successful that you couldn't even lift it, which is a potential problem in and of itself. The net may break and you may lose everything that you've caught there in the process. And so this has to, in my opinion, this has to start maybe clicking with some of them. Now, Mom, you said that you said this, so I'm gonna let you read it. John 21, read verses 7 through 10 there.
Dragging the net with fish. Then, as soon as they had come to land, they saw a fire of coals there, and fish laid on it, and bread. Jesus said to them, bring some of the fish which you have just caught.
Okay. Now, we talked a little bit about things that may sound familiar, might resonate with you a little bit. Who does it seem recognizes Jesus here? John. It doesn't say John, but how do you all come up with that answer? It describes him as the disciple whom Jesus loved, and this is the book of John, so you're kind of writing about John in and of himself right there. The second part of this question, how does Peter respond to this information? Puts his coat on and then does what? Jumps into the sea. Now, I said I want us to think about tonight some things that maybe sound like we've seen this before, right? Have you seen have you seen Peter getting in the water in any of our lessons? Do you remember when? When he walked on the water, right? And it worked out real good for Peter for a while, and then what happened? Do you remember? I stopped focusing and looked like, walking on water, walking on water. And then he started to sink, and Jesus was able to save him, pull him up from that right then and there. Well, I'm not saying that Peter's walking on the water here, but he's jumping out of the boat with an eagerness to be able to see Jesus right there. Now, what were the others doing?
Peter always
Right.
He ain't thinking about nothing. Just put his clothes on, which was a mistake and stuff, you know, die.
Yeah. Right. Right. Good point. Yeah.
He's not even thinking right, he just wants to get to Jesus.
Right. Huh? I think so. Boom. Uh-huh. So if you remember way back when we talked about fishermen, they wore very little because it was so, I mean, it was heavy and hot work. And so and plus, like you were saying, you don't want all these clothes on because that's just going to weight you down in the process of it as well. So I suspect they would have been lightly dressed at this time. Uh-huh. Uh-huh. Right. 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 Uh-huh. Sure. Ben did make a good point, though. Somebody had to wheel the boat in with the fish, right? You know, they had brought in a whole lot of fish, and so they had to bring them in as well. What do they see when they get to land? Yeah. Hot coals with fish and bread. Any miracles that involve fish and bread? There was, right? When there's the whole thousands of people there and they didn't have anything to eat, what'd they feed them? I don't know if it's relevant. I'm just saying it just seems like some things are kind of reminding us of this there again. And so they see this fish. Yeah. Right. And so they wheel in after a long night's work or days or whatever it is, a long night, I guess, because they would have seen him in the morning. And they see food waiting for them. Well, there probably would be nothing better than that, right? After you've worked the whole time, you don't have to cook. You're right there with the food waiting there for you as well. And Jesus tells them to do what? I don't think that's a question I have. What did Jesus tell them? He said, bring some of the fish that you've caught right here. At what point now do you think are all of them recognizing who Jesus is? I'd say the word, especially after John recognizes him, Peter jumps in the water. You know, the rest of them got to bring the boats in, but I'm sure that that's Jesus, that's Jesus, that's Jesus, that's him. Yeah. And so now it's all starting to click, right? It's all starting to make sense for them right there. This is our last set of verses from this, John 21, verse 11 through 14. Tom, do you care to read that, sir? All right. So there's a handful of questions here to finish up. When Jesus told the disciples to bring the fish to the land, they'd caught a whole bunch, but what was it? What do we read? Do they make reference to this in the reading? What was unusual about the net? That's probably too much, right? The net would have, but it doesn't. Okay, so I don't know where the miracle is. I don't know if the miracle is catching the fish or the net not breaking. Who knows which one you might want to call the miracle right there. But nonetheless, they have to bring it in, and it's interesting to see because Ben was talking about Peter jumping in the water a minute ago. But it says in verse 11, what's Peter doing? He's kind of dragging the net on in with them as well. And so they've had a successful venture after a somewhat difficult evening. And Jesus invites them to do what? Come and eat. He put the food there. He said to come and eat at that point, to come and eat. Now, I kind of hinted around at this a minute ago, but at this point, do they recognize Jesus? How so? How do we know they recognize him? So I want to think about verse 12 there for just a little bit. And I want to think about Jesus maybe post-resurrection. At first, it doesn't appear that they recognized Jesus, right? We can sort of throw that off as a long night in the dark, as a shining light, shine off, whatever, however you want to describe it. But even still, in verse 12, it says, none of the disciples dared ask him, "Who are you?" What does that mean? None of them dared ask, "Who are you?" Okay, kind of. Right.
We don't know for sure at this point if he still got the earthly body he was born in.
Right.
We see in the Old Testament where he had a human form.
Uh-huh.
Several different places. And so I'm not sure if he's still got the body that has, like Thomas said, put your hands here.
Right.
I don't know if he still kept that body or if it went on to whatever body we all had.
So that's what, and there's absolutely no way to really answer that question. But I had wondered, and that Ben kind of took what I was thinking right there. Is maybe there's a difference here. I don't know. That's one of the more. The whole resurrection concept is hard to grasp for me. I will say that. I think they recognized him, but maybe we're unsure. I think there's also a mental block of the fact that a person that has died. Think if a person that you knew had died and came back to life, would that be a little hard to grasp even for us, right? And so it's almost like we're still not 100% sure right there, but they knew it was him. But maybe I'm kind of with you, Ben. I'm not sure if he was exactly recognizable the way that maybe they thought he would have looked. I don't know. Any other thoughts on it? Yeah.
I believe he was exactly recognizable because he ate with him before, he ate with him again. All of his bodily functions are the same until he's with them. I believe because Thomas said he let Thomas feel the places in his hands and his side. And I believe he was just a real human being. Now those places were healed.
Yeah.
The scars were still there. And in my mind, he's just, but I think that they're having a hard time grasping him.
Yeah.
This is how people
Right.
still with us, okay? Still with us.
Right.
They don't know how this is going to play out. I think he would have looked very good.
Right. But again, I think that's what, and you said it there, like the mental aspect of this would still be complicated. How does this story end? Verse 13 in particular. He fed them, right? He took care of them. And we talked a little bit about this at the end last week, but that's really what Jesus had done for them the whole time, right? When it was difficult, he had always been there for them. That he had fed them. He had fed them food, but how much teaching had Jesus done during this time period? How much teaching has Jesus done for the apostles? Enormous. This is the greatest apprenticeship you could ever have, right? The whole goal of going to trade school or going to be an apprentice for somebody is to take everything, learn as much as you can, and then when you're out on your own, what do you do with that? You apply it, you utilize it, you put it to work going forward. Jesus said in Matthew chapter 4 that we read at the beginning, he said, "You come with me and I'm going to make you what?" He said, "I'm going to make you fishers of men." And now, here it's time to go, right? Yes, Tom. I think that's absolute. Sometimes you got to cast out in another direction. I think you're exactly right there. And it's just one more lesson before the show's over here, as it were. This is our last series of lessons to leave with. And I hope that they're fitting both for this, but for the whole series as well. And like I said, next week we'll kind of wrap all of this up. But the disciples would be fishers of men, right? And so should we. Matthew 4:19, Mark 1:17, Luke 5:10. Each book tells them that they'll be fishers of men. But we weren't apprenticed to Jesus, right? We weren't with him like the apostles were. But just like Tom said there just a moment ago, we still are adherents to given to them. And their responsibility was to catch men, and ours would be the same thing. We bear fruit in Jesus, but without him, we can do nothing, right? John chapter 15 and verse 5, he said, I am the vine and you're the branches, right? And he said that he that abideth in me and I in him, the same bears much fruit, for without me, you can bear nothing. Well, the apostles were going to have to, this was going to be put to the test for them, right? Because going forward, Jesus wasn't going to be there as the phone a friend from the old TV game show, right? But he would be there where for them? In spirit, right? And I'm sure that there were countless times when the apostles went out that the lessons that Jesus had taught them resonated, right? That he wasn't there, but like, we had this happen once before. I remember this. And sometimes the apostles struggled with that while Jesus was with them, but I'm sure that they made reference to it going forward. And our strength in everything comes from Christ, right? And so their strength 2,000 years ago and our strength today comes from the same. Questions, comments, or anything else before we wrap up?
I mentioned earlier about Paul said that more than 500 brethren saw Jesus in time. That proves again to me, or shows to me, they had to be recognized. They had to be extremely recognized. They, like I said, it still is hard to process. It's hard to process. So you think it's ghosts or some supernatural beings or something.
Right.
These were very, very real. And these apostles, these guys are not the same people they were.
No.
They have been transformed.
Yeah.
We have to be transformed rather than conformed. We can't be the same person. You cast out the net 50 times. Jesus has cast it in.
Right.
You forgive him 7 times. Forgive again. Forgive again. Repent again. We know that from God's work, and then with the help of the Holy Spirit, these guys, they were able to change the world. And Paul would say in Colossians 1:23 that we preach the gospel to every creature under heaven. Jesus left them well with that.
Any others?
Thank you.
No worries. Well, it was enjoyable for me as well. Some of these, and we'll talk a little bit more about this next week, some of these I have read once, and that's about it. I've never really thought much more about it.